evening. Welcome. I'm Greg Partain, the director of the Creative Intelligence Speaker Series, which is co-sponsoring this event with the Hazelrigg Lecture Series for the Humanities and Social Sciences, and also Zoe Strecker's Crucial Terrain Project. So I want to give a very big thank you to Professor Strecker and also Professors Melissa Fortner and Jeremy Payden for their support in bringing our guests to campus for the past 2 days. So keeping in mind this year's Creative Intelligence theme, American Myth and American Reality, I want to share an observation made by the indigenous scholar Howard Adams. The colonizers' falsified stories, he writes, have become universal truths to mainstream society and have reduced Aboriginal culture to a caricature. This distorted reality is one of the most powerful shackles subjugating Aboriginal people. It distorts all indigenous experiences, past and present, and blocks the road to self-determination. So there might be no better person than tonight's guest, Ojibwe scholar and cultural preservationist Anton Treuer, to unpack for us some of the false narratives that distort our understandings of the indigenous peoples of North America, the original inhabitants of this very land that we walk on today. Professor of Ojibwe at Bemidji State University in northern Minnesota, Dr. Treuer earned his Bachelor of Arts from Princeton University and a master's and PhD from the University of Minnesota. A prolific scholar, he has written or edited 18 books, including many for general readers. Widely recognized and one of the foremost scholars of Ojibwe, he stands at the forefront of a movement to textualize this formerly oral language in hopes of preserving and revitalizing it. Treuer's equity, education, and cultural work has put him on a path of service around the nation and the world. He has served on many organizational boards, including the governing board for the Minnesota State Historical Society and the United Nations Technical Working Group on Sustainable Development Goals through Inclusive, Just Energy Solutions. Dr. Treuer has received more than 40 prestigious awards and fellowships, including from the American Philosophical Society, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Science Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, the Bush Foundation, and the John Simon Guggenheim Foundation. In 2018, he was given the Pathfinder Award by the Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums. After his talk, he's going to give us ample opportunity to ask questions, so I hope you take advantage of that. And please help me welcome our distinguished guest, Anton Treuer.
Thank you so much. Kwe niwi majitad Ojibwe muyan bangi mi gwe chinene migwan bajayan gewinde munugug ayawian wagosh indigu minawa migizi indodem kazagasquaji mekag hindun jiba. So excited to see you all this evening. Thank you so much for coming out and joining us for a conversation. I wanted to add to the wonderful introduction that I received here in my Ojibwe language, that my native name is Wagush. That means fox. I'm from the Eagle clan. In our tribe, we have a clan system where there are animals, birds, and fish that double as a symbol for your family as well as a spiritual guide. And I come from Leech Lake, one of the Ojibwe communities in northern Minnesota. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. There's so much to share, and in many ways, even what we'll be able to do tonight is just going to get us started. So I do want to also avail myself to you for ongoing conversation. I'll make sure there are cards here, happy to share copies of the PowerPoint. We're recording the event, and I hope that you'll be able to find things that you can take with you for your own benefit and enrichment and for sparking further conversation. My most recent book, The Cultural Toolbox, is one in which I was grappling with how can I explain to people outside of our cultural community how our family tries to live this culture in this modern world. And I think anybody from any marginalized group has to deal with code switching. W.E.B. Du Bois talked about, dual consciousness. You spend time in your own space, you spend time in the mainstream space, and at some point, all that code switching can become assimilation. And in fact, America has required that of people who have come here or been brought here or subsumed by the new republic one way or another. And so one of the things that happens is that a lot of us are wrestling with questions that our ancestors never had to deal with, like, who am I? What is my culture? Where I think, 10,000 years ago, for most of us, that would be as crazy as asking a bird, who are you? It was pretty obvious. But we also wrestle with ideas that come out of the Abrahamic religious traditions like judgment. Not just do it this way, or you're going to hell kind of judgment, but we judge ourselves and find ourselves wanting. I am less than because I don't know about even something in my own family tree. So I think it's important to message that that is not the case. We are right where we should be, having been through all the things we have been through as human beings. You are a complete, fully realized human being, a soul who has a body. You are the one your ancestors were praying for and waiting for through the generations. You have been given a unique set of gifts, and you yourself are a gift to the world. I've been asked to share a little bit about reconciliation, and for me, this always evokes the need for and some thinking about healing. No matter who we are, no matter what our racial background, cultural background is, all of us as humans need healing. The isms, all of them, dehumanize all of us, whether we are beneficiaries or victims of a particular oppression. And we all need healing from that. It's not easy to find, but I have learned a few things along the way, and I'm going to share a couple stories tonight as a means of sharing some of my observations and thoughts about how we can find healing as individuals and collectively within our society to heal the great hurts that we have inflicted upon one another and continue to fight over in American politics today. So these are some pictures of my father, and sometimes it surprises people to know that even though I'm kind of brown and have, braids, or I have a man bun today, that my father was not native at all. He was actually an Austrian Jewish immigrant, a Holocaust survivor. He spoke nothing but German first 13 years of his life. Eventually, there's a lot to his story, and when we get to questions, feel free to ask about personal things as well as professional ones. But he made it out of there at age 13, made it to America by age 14. Eventually, his parents and two cousins also survived the Holocaust, and the rest of the family, some 300 family members, were killed in the camps. And when he got to America, he went through a number of transformations. It felt like he restarted his life many times. At age 17, he lied about his age, enlisted in the U.S. Army at the end of World War II, hoping to go kill Nazis, and they sent him to the Pacific Theater. He was stationed in the Philippines. Whoops. He eventually made his way to Minnesota, met my mom, and here I am. I never, my father had not gone back to Austria from his departure in 1938 until he took me in 1986, and I was about 17 years old. And man, he had a tough time. He had spoken German his whole life with his mother, but when he stepped off the plane and he was in an immersive German environment, he had a total meltdown. At times he had crying jags. I was a teenager, and so I wasn't necessarily processing things. I mainly just felt angry. which I suppose would be a natural response in thinking about all of these things and empathizing with my father and so forth. And he took us around and showed us places. And I think when we are hurt, the most natural and instinctive responses are to be angry. In fact, we have this saying, hurt people hurt people. I think it provides evidence, too, that it is not just those of us in communities of color who need the healing when white males dominate the ranks of serial killers and school shooters. We all need the healing. Well, I didn't go back again myself until this summer and had a great and transformative experience. I brought my kids. You'll see pictures of some of them. And we toured around. My dad had kept detailed notes, addresses, all this stuff, so we went to the Volksschule where he went to school right here. These are some of my crew here. The house, apartment building where they lived is still there. My grandpa's store. We checked out the Karl Marxhof, which is a residential complex, and my grandfather and others had taken it over in 1934 to protest the fascist takeover in Austria. They were shelled by the Austrian army. This is 4 years prior to all the Nazi stuff. We went to some concentration camps. Mauthausen, where my grandfather's mountain climbing partner was killed. Dachau. Went to our family's vacation property, which is not this whole lake, but nearby. By the way, the apartment complex, my grandfather's store, the vacation property, all confiscated and given to Aryans who still own it and receive the transmission of intergenerational wealth. And we connected with some friends. There were some Austrian academics who had spent a year in Minnesota and spent a lot of time with my dad, and I got to know them pretty well then too. And so, of course, we let them know we're coming to Austria. So they said, well, we're taking you hiking. And so we did all of this cool stuff. They said, pretty much almost every family in Austria has at least one grandparent who was a Nazi. And for us, they're a husband and wife, all of our grandparents were Nazis. For Thomas, here, he said, my paternal grandparents were unrepentant Nazis. They thought the Nazis did nothing wrong. He said, I am proud that none of their grandkids think the same way. But although it wasn't him, families like his were owning all my grandparents' stuff. In the injustice of the fact that those who in Austria and Germany may have orchestrated or benefited in some way from things like the Holocaust might have to learn about it and feel guilty, but they all got to have babies and grandkids and live in these beautiful places. There's no way to actually make it right. But unlike my first trip, connecting with the Schmidingers and seeing the beauty of the places, the beauty of these people, allowing myself to even see the beauty of that culture, at the same time that I could see everything they did to my family and so many others. Helped me move out of anger to a different, I think, more nuanced view of things. And although it might have been a blessing to someone like Thomas that I wasn't just bad country, bad people, which was convenient and easy psychologically, the biggest gift was to me and to my kids to find some healing. It's helpful for me as I think about America, which in many ways saved my dad and tried to kill my mom many, many times in ways. That as I think about America, it means different things to different people. Land of the free, home of the brave, our foundational promise is quite beautiful. In fact, although we the people meant white male property owners, we changed the definition of we the people without having to shred the Constitution, which, among other things, speaks to the power and strength of that particular document. Included most of us in this room. And then at the same time, things like the Second Amendment, it's not simply about the right to bear arms, but enabling slave patrols to police black bodies. All of this language about states' rights was not simply about power to the people, but about how can we have states where some people believe owning other humans is okay, and even the foundation of our economy can be united in a nation with states that believe that's not okay. America is a land of incredible opportunities and horrendous oppressions. Both. Two sides of the same coin. One of the things we're stuck on right now is that so many Americans only want us to look at one side of the coin and say that's what America's all about, and the rest of the books that would say anything different. But if we want to be honest, there are many, many countries, South Africa, Canada, and others that have said we need to take a look at our national history, own our oppressions, past and present, and try to make something different. Even a truth and reconciliation process is hardly perfect. It's an ongoing effort. If we're in a relationship with anybody, a lifelong friend, a marriage partner, or what have you, we will likely injure that person many times and have to heal that relationship many times. And the bigger the injury, the more attention and work it will need. It's a way of saying we can't get to healed and skip all the healing. We cannot get to reconciled and skip all the reconciling. We have to do uncomfortable work. On my mom's side of the family, this is my great-grandmother, who was really the last generation in our family where all the kids were running around hollering at each other in our tribal language and so forth. My grandmother here, Luella, who passed away just about a year ago at the age of 98, was taken from her parents at age 6 and sent to a residential boarding school and forbidden to speak her tribal language. And there was an assault on the intergenerational transmission of our language and culture. Those who orchestrated the assault thought they were doing a great favor to my grandmother. In fact, there was a mantra for the founder of the first residential boarding school. Our goal is to kill the Indian in order to save the man. If we can eradicate their language and culture, they will only have sweet American apple pie left. Of course, it didn't work that way. It destroyed families. What happens when you have little 6-year-old kids that are digging ditches half the day and stuff? The schools kept cemeteries for children. Well, she made it through there. By the way, that's my youngest child. This picture is about 10 years old now. They're both named Luella. And so when my mom came into the world, my grandmother, by the way, made it back home, married a local boy and started raising a family. And for my mother, she was raised with pretty endemic poverty. They pulled all the kids from school when it was time for hunting or wild rice harvesting. All the kids had to help with food production. It was less a cool cultural pastime than more a necessary means of survival. When she went to school, she only met one professional Native person ever, and that person was the school nurse. And she thought, well, maybe I can do that. So she went to nursing school. One of her first jobs, she came back to work for our tribe's health program, and she thought, wow, our people are really getting pushed around. I'm going to do something about that. And she went back to school and got a law degree. She was actually the first female Native attorney in the state of Minnesota. And she'd haul me with her to court, and she'd say, sit there and don't say a word. So I would sit there and not say a word. And she never explained anything, and I don't really remember the cases, but I remember noticing things. And what I noticed is that she was the only woman in court, and that she was the only Native person in court. And I walked out of there thinking, you know what? We can do stuff. I couldn't see it then, but I can sure see it now. What a gift that was. This spoke to the power of role models. For her, the one Native role model she had. For me, what I saw from my mom. This is the D part of the DEI. We need the representation. It doesn't work when you have the all-male gender equity team, no matter how woke they are. You are missing vital perspectives, and the optics aren't so good. It's the same with the all-white racial equity team. And even though interracial marriage is higher than ever, and we are more diverse than ever, we are more segregated than we were before desegregation. So we have to figure out how to build bridges and forge community together. By the way, the lines between us are largely imagined. In the Yuval Harari book, Sapiens, he looks at all the different groups of humans, because there weren't just sapiens, there were Neanderthals and many other different groups of humans coexisting at the same time, and he was asking the question, how come sapiens rose to the top? And he posits that the biggest initial shift, because all of us lived kind of like apes in groups of up to 150, and then when you got more than that, there was a fight and you had two groups. Until the invention of fiction. And once someone invented fiction, which is something that apes didn't really do, you could imagine community with the next group of 150. And then go commit genocide on the Neanderthals, which is likely what happened. So we imagine community for both benefit and detriment. And all too often we're thinking just us instead of justice. Well, there's me as a tyke. When my folks were getting started, my dad was hitting the restart button. My mother was trying to find a pathway out of poverty. We had a little house that had no electricity or running water. Hand pump, buy a gallon of milk, tie a string on it, sink it in the creek. It was spring-fed, kept it cool. Wash up in the creek in the summer, enamel wash basin in the winter, and I never felt poor. And I never had food insecurity. But of course I saw big changes, because I was in about middle school when my mom, had her law degree and built a nice house and showed me the power of an education. There's my crew, 9 kids. It's a big, beautiful, blended family, his, theirs, and somebody else's kids. Here's my wife in the middle of the stack. It's hard to see. Blonde hair, blue eyes. She's from the Swedish-American tribe. Somebody's getting along. A lot of times we think that the healing, the solution, the connection, it's over the next hill somewhere. We just got to get lucky enough to find out which hill. Or maybe it'll stumble upon us. But rather than approaching things passively, I think it's important to remember that connection and culture live inside of us. And having a rich cultural life is not just about looking out and looking for, but about looking within. And we can do that wherever we live. And the awakening is healing and empowering. So I went to Princeton University, initially with the goal, I'm going to get out of town and never come back. A lot of high schoolers have that idea. I got there and I was like, I want to go home and never leave. In the long run, that's exactly what I did. I probably freaked my parents out. And there's more I could share about my experiences there. I'll just save those for questions if you're curious. But I told my parents, I know I have an Ivy League education, but I'm not taking a job. and I am not going to graduate school, and I'm going to hang out with my elders, walk the earth, live our culture, and learn more about our language. And they said, that's beautiful. Good luck paying for that. We're done. So that's what I did. So I went to find this guy, Archie Mose, who was born in 1901. All of his kids were even born in wigwams. He was 12 the first time he met a white man. He was in his 30s the first time he met a black man or saw a car. So I thought when I went to see him, he'd be sitting in a wigwam, smoking his peace pipe, praying for world peace. And he was in a little modern house watching WWF SmackDown on a TV, laughing really loud. And he shut off the TV and he said, "Oh, I've been waiting for you." I said, "What? How could you be waiting for me? You don't know who I am." And he said, "Well, I had a dream, and you look like that person from my dream." And for him, that was enough. He opened up the door. I lived on his couch. I was his gopher. Go for this, go for that. Grab that drum, drive me here, bring me there. And I was just thrilled to be in the room. It was kind of like Forrest Gump when he figured out that he could run. After that, every time he went somewhere, he was running, and he didn't think it would take him anywhere, but it sure did. So it felt like that for me as I continued on my language and culture quest. By the way, that is the Dalai Lama with Archie. We took him to the conference on world religions in Chicago, and the Dalai Lama wanted to meet Archie because he was the oldest spiritual leader there. They looked like they could be cousins or something. Brown, bald, glasses, you know. But here comes the Dalai Lama and a line of monks, and they're bowing, and Archie had never seen anyone bow before and had no idea what to do. So he started patting everybody on the head, saying, "It's okay, that's all right." And unbeknownst to him, the head is a sacred vessel. In the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, it's taboo to touch the head, so the Dalai Lama stops the line and says, "Okay, how do you greet?" He goes, "I don't know, shake hands." So the Dalai Lama goes to shake his hand, and Archie goes like this, so they got an arm wrestler handshake, which I thought was kind of cute. In about 1997, I was driving to Round Lake, Wisconsin, which is where Archie was from. So he's from a different community than me. And I knew that Betsy would be there. It's one of his daughters. She's holding my firstborn daughter at the time. And Betsy was super sweet to me. She'd kiss me on each cheek every time we met. She'd hug me close. She kind of loved the way I loved her dad. And but she did have a good, like, quote-unquote, mean Indian look. And she could give it to her grandkids or shake her cane, and man, they'd scurry around. But for the first time in my life, she was looking at me like I was one of the grandkids. And I'd been thinking, you know, as I was on my way there, like, Archie was in his 90s, and they'd made him do all the talking and a lot of the singing, and you know, it was weird, right? He's old, give him a break. But of course, in our way, our word for an elder, Gitchiaya, means great being. Our word for an elderly woman, Mindemuye, means one who holds things together and describes the role of the family matriarch. And so, the older you get, the more valued you become. It's actually one of the really beautiful things about our cultural practices. Your value is not pretending that you're 20 forever and being disappointed or having low self-esteem when that doesn't happen. And there's something for each phase of life. In any event, she was looking at me like I was one of the grandkids, and she said, "I bet you're wondering who's going to talk today." I said, "Yeah, who's going to do that?" And she said, "Well, you are." I said, "What? I'm not even from here. I'm a kid." She goes, "Well, you've been following him around all these years. I'm going to find out what you learned." And so I had to stand up there and do my first ceremonial big drum talk, and I dared one glance at her when I was done. She gave me a nod, and that was that. And so I kind of sit on a three-legged stool, and one of them is the stuff that Archie was doing, officiating at ceremonies, drum ceremonies, medicine, dance, funerals, things like that. I also work at a university now. I actually did go to graduate school eventually and did take a job, and trying to revitalize our language and so forth. And then I do a lot of DEI work and travel all over the place and write books. There's my daughter, the one who is in this picture. She's all grown up now. I remember it's just such a terrifying job being a parent because you got one shot at it, and the goal is do not mess your kid up. But no do-overs, you know? And it's a scary world out there. Among the things that, in addition to everything parents normally think about, I was thinking, how do I make sure she learns our language, our culture? It's so scary and difficult in this day and age when English is everywhere. We're still doing colonization. How do I protect her from the things that my mother and grandmother's generations had to go through? So when she was born, I said, I'm only going to speak Ojibwe to her. I remember she woke up one night about age 2 and she's saying, and she's crying around for milk. And I remember thinking, yes, it's working. It's working. And then remember one time she was about 4. I had to give a keynote at this Ojibwe language conference, and there are hundreds of people there. She was literally running in circles around the podium while I'm doing my talk, and finally her little voice caught the microphone, going, hingi boogid, meaning I farted. Whole place erupted into laughter, and no one could hear anything I had to say the rest of the day. But they were all talking. Did you hear that little girl? She was speaking Ojibwe. Something's happening here. This is really cool. So I'm very proud of her now. She's 26, and she's a fluent speaker. Kind of down on the bottom here. It's a little hard to see, but she's transcribing elders and part of a publishing team that's been working on Rosetta Stone and new books for Ojibwe and all kinds of cool stuff. Teaches the language at a school. So I think it is possible to even heal the intergenerational attacks and assaults and oppressions on a family, on a family's financial well-being, mental health, community. These things can be healed. That doesn't mean it's easy, and that doesn't mean it just happens because it should. And dealing with any kind of drama and trauma, there's no guarantee that you're going to have a positive outcome. But there are ways to have positive outcomes. So we have to orchestrate those things. I'll share another story. This is one of my sons. So I mentioned we have a big, beautiful blended family. And my ex-wife stumbled into the darkness. The kind that, it affects every family in America. She got into drugs. And it's unbelievable to me, but she's still alive. But kind of barely. I live in a big, beautiful house surrounded by all these amazing kids. And we've tried everything to help her, and she is literally homeless today. Actively using. We can't pull her out of it. This guy was an infant in arms when she fell. And the recipient of the kind of blessings and curses only a father can bestow. He has no memory of being held by his mother. And I remember being so scared, like, you got one shot at parenting. The goal is don't mess your kid up. How's he going to deal with this? I relied a lot on ceremonies and things that in our kind of cultural toolbox that were useful as we tried to restart our lives. So we had a little house blessing ceremony for when we were moving into the new place. And he was really a little guy, and we blessed a little eagle feather. We hung it on the southwest corner of the house. And I said, this will be like a protection for our family, maybe when bad weather comes and things like that. And that kid, for years, it would start to storm, and he'd run outside, run around the house, check on the feather, and run back in. And he was like, it's there. I was like, okay, good, soaking wet. And we had another one called a bear smoke. We made a miniature wigwam. We put little offerings in there for each member of the family, kind of keeping us together in one lodge. And he'd go running around playing in the woods. He'd stop and he'd stare at that. And he'd start to smile, and then he'd go run off playing again. And again, it seemed to reassure him a little bit. And I'm probably a little anxiety prone. And for a while there, I was single parenting a pretty huge mob of kids. So his kids, that I had with my ex-wife, her kids from a previous relationship, so there was already, half a dozen kids at that point. And so I was totally overwhelmed and stressed out. And if we went out to eat, I'd say, we're going to an all-you-can-eat buffet, and I'd tell them, put us in the far back, as far away from regular humans as you can, and the kids would still make a big drama because they'd come to go to the bathroom up front and run through the restaurant yelling, I took a crap. I was like, no, I don't know them. I remember one time trying to get the coat on this kid, and he had fists, and he's trying to push him through the thing, and so I said, all right, kid, what's in your hands? I got the mac and cheese. He's like trying to smuggle 2 cents worth of mac out of the buffet, which on the one hand is like my crazy little, in a loving way, savage kids, right? But on the other hand, my anxiety would kick in and I'd be like, oh my God, is he gonna have food issues now? Is it like his mom can be taken? Now he's going to think food can be taken, nothing's safe, nothing's secure. He's going to be hiding candy bars between the bed sheets, But he found a way. Kid is super outgoing, very charismatic. He got into music. He's a really great singer and signed up for show choir, which is our equivalent of Glee Club. In preparation, I had to watch the entire series of Glee with the kids. And I was teasing him. I said, it's going to be just like that show. Whoever's dating somebody at the start of the year, they're all going to switch partners by the end of the year. There's going to be a lot of crying. There's going to be a lot of hugging. There's going to be a lot of drama and a bunch of good music and probably a trophy. And he was like, shut up, Dad. It's not going to be like that. You don't know. I was like, okay. And I had to miss his first out-of-town meet. And so I said, it doesn't matter what time it is, midnight, 1 a.m., you just call me. So he calls, and it was one of the great calls for a dad, because it started with, Dad, I love you. I'm like, I love you too, my boy, what's going on? And so I got like a dozen spontaneous I love yous out of him in one phone call. And he's like, Dad, we won. Everybody's crying. They're all hugging each other. It's like, I told you. And it seemed like things are going well. And then, we get the pandemic, prom's canceled, show choir's canceled, he's home, sulky, sullen. And it seems like with the girls, they would tend to mature a little earlier than the boys. I think that's true to maybe the data set. And they'd usually have a good fight with my wife around that time. And it's necessary that they break from their parents and stuff, but it's not always comfortable. The boys, however, it would be later, and they'd usually have it out with me. But it's really awkward because that's often like launch time and time to figure out what's next when Dad doesn't know anything. So I had to push him. I was like, all right, kid, there are 1,000 definitions of success. It doesn't matter to me if you want to be a firefighter, if you want to be a medical doctor, whatever. But there has to be a plan. And my job is to support you. If you're interested, I'm happy to coach if you're willing. So finally he says, okay, I got a plan. I'm going to get out of town, never come back. I was like, this sounds very familiar. It was the same plan I had. I was like, okay, what do you got? He said, well, I want to go to Dartmouth because of all the Ivy League schools, that's the one where there's actually some decent native programs, and I think that would be a fit. I was like, that is a great goal. I totally support you. And it's a little embarrassing to admit this, because I've written a whole bunch of books, but I may have looked down my nose a little bit at the benefit and power of like journaling and writing your own ideas out and kind of using it as a pensieve or doing the Brene Brown thing and rewriting your story, But it was really great for him. So he wrote about my dad. He was really close with my dad. Every morning we used to drop him at my dad's house when he was in Head Start because he had a different bus, and so they'd have breakfast together every day, and every time he was in trouble, he'd run over to my dad's and say, I'm in trouble. He'd say, I'm going to punish you then. Start giving him cookies. And so he wrote a little bit about my dad, about my mom and my grandma. Like there's traumas and genocides, both sides of the family. And he wrote about his mom and times when he felt angry, And then also times when he couldn't feel anything at all, except maybe guilty because he couldn't feel anything at all. And then he said, you know, we are more than the sum of our tragedies. And all that trauma, it stops with me. From a teenager, you know? Well, he got in, so I was a big crying, blubbering mess, you know, as he's opening up his letter, and he's screaming and literally running in circles outside the house. That was pretty awesome. But I think there were times when people would say things to me like, you know, you saved those kids, you pulled them out of the darkness, you know, and I was like, that doesn't feel like what I was doing at all. Because every time that little kid was like looking at the eagle feather on the corner of the house and putting a smile on his face, or the bear smoke, or finding a way to sing through the adversity, like he was restoring my faith in our decency as human beings, in our capacity to heal, in our resiliency. I didn't save that kid. He saved me. Now, I packed way more in here than I'll be able to go through tonight, so I may skip a couple slides as we go, but don't worry, it's just the beginning. I like this Lila Watson quote, "If you've come to help me, you are wasting your time, but if you've come because your liberation is tied up with mine, then let us work together." Doing this kind of work, the quest for healing, for the reconciling, for actually dealing with race and racism and things like that, it's not an act of charity for the disenfranchised or the marginalized. We all need liberation from those dynamics. Lila Watson, she's Australian indigenous, by the way. And so there are a couple other books, and I think I'll just skip through these that kind of approach different parts of it, but I'll give you a couple other things before we do some questions. So I sometimes use this analogy, like if I hold up my finger and say, "What is that?" I might start a fight unless we clarify in what language, because in the language of body parts, indeed, it's a finger. But in the language of numbers, well, that's a 1. And in the language of space, up. So who's right? And of course, they're all right. It's a matter of language, perspective, or context. But all too often, especially when there's a tough topic like coronavirus, politics, or race relations in America, somebody's up there saying, "Here's a finger, it's not an elbow, it's not a toe. The rest of you, shh." And somebody's listening going, "Wait, what? That's a 1, not a 2. See? They just don't understand." And we totally miss each other. But if we can see that as a finger and 1 and up and all the other many things that it can mean, that's powerful. That's multiple perspectives, right? By the way, you could be married to somebody for 50 years in a row. They will still take you by surprise and give you something to argue about. So, if you want to have a friend, if you want to be in a marriage, if you want to work in a workplace that's more than 2 people, being able to see things from multiple perspectives is so helpful. Instead of shouting them down, "You don't know what the heck you're talking about." "Oh, that one seemed to really bother you. I'm sorry, sweetheart. Could you help me understand why?" Totally different response. Our politicians do not provide a very good example of this because they are shouting each other down, obstructing one another, not holding space, not trying to build common ground or do anything collectively or collaboratively. They're engaged in culture wars. When what we need to be engaged in is building bridges and healing these great hurts that have been plaguing our country since its inception. So I'll give you a tool or two that may be helpful as we think about navigating tough topics. So my wife and I, this feels like yesterday, but it's been a little while now. And we experience this world so differently. We live in rural northern Minnesota. We both like to run, and so when I get up and go for a run, I'm like, the sun is shining, the birds are singing, this is awesome, and I don't really feel unsafe. There are people texting and driving, but I'm on the side of the road and I can probably get out of the way if they're getting a little crazy. Once in a great while, somebody slows down and gives me a mean look or something, and I'm like, I'm an Aubrey, oh my God, but for the most part, I don't feel unsafe. I'm just having a good run. Now, when my wife goes for a run, if somebody slows down to give her a good look or pulls over to the side of the road like you're supposed to deal with your cell phone, her heart starts to race, and she's like, oh my God, this is it. This is going to be a sexual assault. What's my escape plan? Should I run in the woods? Should I go back now? Why did I go for a run? I could have gone on the treadmill. It's not enough to stop her from going for a run, but the data says she is not as safe as me doing the same thing as me. Our many conversations reveal she never feels as safe as me doing the same thing as me. By the way, I happen to be a nice guy. I work at a university, same position for 23 years in a row. I've chaired many search committees where we look for new employees, and on every single one, I've made sure at least half the people on the committee are women. I'm trying to do the things, but whether I like it or not, whether I want it or not, whether I'm oblivious or not, I get to be safer in that context. Right? So herein lies one of the problems navigating the isms. The problem is that we are all enculturated to individualism. Strongly. Rugged individualism, up by your own bootstraps, entrepreneurial drive, ambition. What's my last name? Put that on the kids. Look at the plaques on the wall in my office, right? And we're competitive about it, like how many sporting events where nobody wins and nobody loses. Yoga? Probably have a yoga competition soon. How many board games where nobody wins and nobody loses? And there are a couple. The Sinking Islands game where everybody gets off or nobody does. But for the most part, I'm crushing the kids at risk. I'm utterly destroying them in a game of chess. So we have individualism, competition. I'd say materialism. They kind of feed one another. As a result, if we say there's a problem with sexism and patriarchy, men start thinking, if there's sexism, there has to be a sexist. If they're not looking at themselves, they must be looking at me. Wait a minute, I'm a nice guy, you don't know me. And people get defensive. But we're not saying you're not a nice guy. We're saying women aren't as safe when they go for a run. Can we do something about that? If we step back from the individualism, we can see that something like sexism and patriarchy is complex and operates at many levels. There are individual acts that range from low-level implicit bias to somebody, saying sexist things to someone actively discriminating. They're on a spectrum. But that's only one part of it. There are also systems, policies, procedures, and practices that make it more difficult for women to have the same treatment, safety, and so forth. And we are all breathing the same smog enculturated to sexism and patriarchy. By the way, that means all of us, because we're breathing the smog, may exhibit behaviors and thoughts that reinforce the patriarchy even among women. Small example. My wife and I go out to eat a lot, and I'd say about 85% of the time, they give me the bill. About 15% of the time, it goes in the middle of the table. Very rare that anybody hands her the bill. And it might not seem like a privilege to always get the bill, but it comes with these cultural assumptions about, we even have these kind of sexist sayings, who wears the pants in the family, stuff like that. Who do you need to impress to get a tip? How do you treat people differently? Even though most of the people who are, working as servers happen to be women. Now, when we get into cars, roles reverse. She can be cruising 43 and a 30, which, by the way, in all honesty, is kind of normal for her, running kids to school. Cop on the corner is like, lady, keep it down. She's never been pulled over, never had a citation. I'm a fuddy-duddy professor, dude. I'm usually wearing my nerd glasses for driving. I actually do drive the speed limit, and I've been pulled over about 40 times, 40. Twice this past year for no seatbelt while wearing seatbelt in broad daylight. Officer, I am wearing a seatbelt. Oh, you are now. And twice had police officers pull guns, including a routine traffic stop in a minivan with my kid is a middle school honor student bumper sticker with the kids in the car in the broad daylight coming unholstered to the window. Know why I pulled you over? No, sir. Clocked you 4 miles over. I'm so sorry. I'm sure your radar's accurate. You're like, oh my God. So many things. First time I took Blair camping, I had kids, so they came with. And we get pulled over. Cops like license and registration. I got that in the visor. And then starts this shakedown. What's your last name and how do you spell it and who owns this car? And it's like they're starting to get weird because they had all the documents that proved all of that, It's like, is it hard to believe that I own a late model Honda, But I wouldn't say that. Get out. I'm thinking, man, I've got a constitutional protection from unreasonable searches and seizures. There's no probable cause. If I tell him that, he's really going to have it in for me. Sure, no problem. Get out, starts going through all the camping gear. Looking for whatever, drug paraphernalia. He says, you wait right here. Goes back up. Ma'am, are you okay? Are you sure you're okay? Yeah, I'm fine. You could tell me or just nod if you're not okay. Right? I don't know what was going on. I don't know if it's a thing in patriarchy that treats women as property, and it looked like I was stealing his property because she's got blonde hair and blue eyes, or what. By the way, this is one of the issues within our police culture, is that there's a lot of discretion in policing. So we don't do like stop and frisk or start searching randomly in college dorm rooms, or the newspaper headlines would be all about the epidemic of substance abuse among the collegiate white citizenry, because there's a dime bag in half y'all's rooms. But that's not where we do that. And so we do that in communities of color. That's been what the data says and my personal experience. So I get back in the car and I'm like, well, Blair, are you sure you want to date me? Because that is not the last time that will happen. And it wasn't. She stayed though. Even all of our children, so we got 9 kids, so 6 are out the door, they've all been pulled over. None of her siblings or their children, who all have the Scandinavian look, have been. Right? By the way, here too, if we say there's a problem with racism because of individualism, white folks start thinking if there's racism, there has to be a racist. If they're not looking at themselves, they have to be looking at me. Wait a minute, I'm a good person. You don't know me. But we're not saying you're not a good person. We're saying people of color don't get to live as long. And that's not okay. Can we do something about that? By the way, I'm friends with our chief of police, Mike Maston. He's awesome. He believes in community policing. He comes to our courageous conversations about race. We convinced him to put Ojibwe language signage on the cop cars. Check it out. Ganawainjagang Minawa Nadamagang, to protect and serve. How cool is that? Awesome. Not bad people. Of course, His team did pull me over 40 times. As an example of this, and I'll be mindful of our clock here too. So this is just a kid who's going to school using the foster care system in Texas, and the school said, we have a rule here that says all boys need a haircut above the collar. And the foster parents said, well, this is a native kid. This is an important part of their culture. For his tribe, they only cut their hair if there's been a death in the family. The kid's very young. He was just removed from his parents. He might think his parents died. This could actually traumatize him. The school writes back and says, if you can prove that he's an enrolled member of a federally recognized tribe and authenticate that this is an important part of their religion, we can use that to try to petition the school board for a variance, which they did. And I raise this example simply to say, there's probably nobody in the school district in Seminole, Texas who's thinking, let's pass some rules to make life a little harder for these native kids. They're probably thinking, short hair is normal for boys. We had problems with bullying last year. If all the boys have short hair, one less thing for them to bully each other over. This will be good for kids. That's probably what they're thinking. But systems, rules, policies, procedures, not bad people, still gives you a racially predictable impact on a whole group of people. And our systems are full of that kind of stuff. You've probably seen this picture before, kind of famous. Standing on the crates, that's me going for a run. Down in the pit, that's my wife going for a run. Or there's my wife going for a drive, and here's me going for a drive. If we say we're so fair-minded, we're going to treat everybody the same. We're going to pretend we don't see race. We're all colorblind. And you get this. Doesn't make sure everyone can see, everyone can play, everyone can be equally compensated for the same efforts. If we say we're going to give different supports to different people based on their different circumstances, it can mitigate some of the issues, but it doesn't change the fact that something is so messed up that we have to give people different supports. And so that's where we get a justice frame. Let's kick that fence down altogether and remove the systemic barriers. We can't teach what we don't know. We can't lead where we won't go. This stuff, I think it's important to acknowledge, it just freaks some people out. And I wonder if I've got it in here, because I might not. So it was just unbelievable to me when the women's suffrage movement was coming to fruition 100 years ago. There were all of these advertisements taken out by men that had pictures of a giant woman sitting on a skinny guy, and it says, when women get the vote, and stuff like that. It was just ridiculous and horrendous. But men were terrified that if women rose, got the vote, they'd be outvoting the men, and men would be oppressed. That if women entered the workforce, they'd be stealing jobs from men. Well, women did get the vote, and they did enter the workforce, and guess what happened? It didn't steal pie from the men, it grew the pie. Stock market took off, even though men were the primary owners of stocks and the primary financial beneficiaries of that change. Today, 100 years later, around the world, across democracies around the world, women have been elected to 17% of political leadership positions. Patriarchy is alive and well. And men were not oppressed by women starting to rise. Today, there's a fear that if people of color rise, they'll be stealing pie from white folk. We'll flip roles between who's the oppressor and who is the oppressed. And so, among some Americans, there's an instinct to protect a basket of unearned advantages that have disproportionately gone to one group, make it harder for people of color not just to come here, but to vote. Make it illegal to give somebody a glass of water when they stand in line for 4 hours waiting to vote, and it's only certain communities, primarily communities of color, where you would have to stand in line for 4 hours to get to your vote. Right? All kinds of stuff like this. And I think instead of fighting over who gets to be the oppressor and who has to be the oppressed, we could work together and fight oppression. Then the system can work for all of us. For most of the lives of most of the young people in this room, there will be no racial majority in this country. Protecting minority interests, again, is not an act of charity for the disenfranchised. It's an act of self-interest because we will all have a minority experience one way or another. By the way, I'm coming for everything my ancestors were denied. But it should not freak anybody out. Because by that, I mean I'm coming for longevity. If I get it, it will not reduce anybody else's longevity. I'm coming for equal rights. If I get them, it's not going to deprive anyone else of their rights. I'm coming for humanity, and if I get it, it will enhance everyone else's humanity rather than diminish it. I'm coming for prosperity. And you know what? If everyone in America were to finish high school and finish college and be gainfully employed, that means we're all load-bearing citizens paying taxes rather than drains on the government. And more fully humanized and healed. We all do better when we all do better. The Desmond Tutu book, The Book of Forgiving, is pretty great. He, of course, won a Nobel Peace Prize for his work in South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation effort. And he said, when there's been an injury, and this applies to the individual ones and the big collective ones too, there's a simple to say, but not always easy to do process to get to healed. You have to tell that story. Have that story received and validated, put a name on the hurt. That was genocide or whatever. That was slavery. And then you can do the forgiveness part, which is not saying that what happened in the past is okay. It just says that happened, we accept it. And now we're going to decide, do we renew or release the relationship? For me, sharing my stories with the Schmidinger family from my dad's side, having those stories received, hearing and receiving theirs, putting names on those things, made it possible to work on the forgiveness, and in that case, deciding to renew the relationship. Some dude cheats on his wife, wants to go reconcile the relationship. He won't get too far saying, forget about it, all happened in the past. Probably got to say sorry, mean it, be believed. It'll never happen again, mean it, be believed, and then there's whatever chance to get that reconciled. But if you don't go through that process, guaranteed divorce and pain all around, harder to heal for everybody. He would need to sit there and hear the story of her pain. A label on that, that was betrayal. And then there can be forgiveness and either a divorce or a reconciliation, but a better chance at healing with either path. America has a very hard time holding space for the telling of the story. We often only want to hear star-spangled awesomeness. But we have to be able to hold space for the beautiful and the dark. No human wants to be judged by their darkest day, and no nation does either. But we have to acknowledge them. And when we shine a light on it, the shame starts to evaporate. You could say that Germany is an honorable nation in spite of the Holocaust, in large part because of their thorough acknowledgments of it, because of the markers at the houses where all of the Jewish families lived, acknowledging who lived there, where they were brought, when they died, where and how. That makes it possible to see the beauty and honor in Germany better, more fully, and more broadly than if we pretended that never happened and only spoke to the awesomeness. It's an act of emotional maturity to do so. So America does need to grow up. With the Native experience in history, our stories are often marginalized. There are more movies about aliens than Native Americans. If you know enough to know there's something you don't know, it's time to lean in. There are so many books. There are so many free resources, YouTube videos, and other things. There are 10 million Native people in the census. It's not that dang hard to find us. So if you feel there are gaps or things, especially in a state like Kentucky where, I don't know, there's probably not a lot in the state educational standards and not a lot happening even at colleges and universities, although there are efforts like this one, then we have to amplify and create more and do our part of the lift. Do some reading, do some listening, and make sure that we are doing the I part of the DEI. By the way, we are ancient and modern, thousands of years of human history still in the making. All right, so a couple things and then we'll take your questions. I like the Cornel West quote, "We are not a nation of immigrants, we're a nation with immigrants, with indigenous peoples and enslaved Africans in our origin." One word makes all the difference. We are not a nation of immigrants. We are a nation with immigrants. I would say the same thing, that we are not a Christian nation. We are a nation with Christians, with Jews, with Muslims, with Sufis, with traditional Native Americans, with agnostics, with atheists, all of whom are just as American as anybody else. And when we say something like America is a Christian nation, what we're implying is that if you're not Christian, you are not authentically American. Which, aside from being incorrect, is rather mean-spirited. Imagine how that feels for a traditional Native American or for anybody else. I got to skip a couple of these, even though I got some really cool stories. We'll do it for next round. But let me just conclude by sharing a couple of things that may be useful to you. I'll just share, maybe this story will be helpful. I got brought to Mille Lacs, one of the Ojibwe reservations in central Minnesota, and I had a crazy meeting. They said, "We need your advice. We got some overages from grants. We want to do something on language revitalization." I said, "Okay, I'm coming." Got there, "How much are the overages from grants?" And they said, "Well, it's about $14 million. I almost spit my teeth out. And at that point, they had identified only 25 remaining fluent first speakers of the language, and most of them were sitting right there. A Jedi council of sorts. And they're all over 70. I said, "Man, they're not like going to college for 5 years, coming back and teaching for 20. You got to do something else." I said, "How about let's do Rosetta Stone, let's do some Ojibwe language books, let's build tools and resources that'll have lasting value." And so we worked through the pandemic. This guy on the left, Joe Nakwanabe, it's a little hard to see his face, but his brother died from COVID, his sister died from COVID. It was hard. But coming out of the pandemic, we had a big launch event for the books and stuff. I think I may have some pictures of them. And when we got together, Joe was speaking, and he said, I thought he'd be saying this was the toughest time of our lives. He said, we've been through a lot. But looking at our ability and what we've done to produce Rosetta Stone, these books, all the young people coming around, knowing that we have set up our elders here to teach people our language for hundreds of years to come, I think this was the happiest time of my life. And it's a reminder that although we've been through all kinds of crap as humans, that healing is kind of a two-way street. It's not something that is done to the injured, but when we heal others, we receive healing. When we help others, we receive help. The receiving is in the giving. Seeing other cool things, man, I could recommend the Joy DeGruy book. she talks about, in the Black experience, reconnecting to Black indigeneity, had this powerful experience going to Lesotho, talking to elders, introduced herself as an African-American woman, and their translators were going at it with the elders for about half an hour because they couldn't understand the term African-American. And then the elders just said to her, "You are not African-American. You are African. You're one of the lost ones. You've been gone for a few hundred years. But welcome home." And she was crying and hugging everybody. And you don't have to take a trip, be it to Africa, or if you're Irish, to Ireland, or if you're Viking roots, to go back to Norway or whatever. Although those experiences can produce some of that catharsis, there are a lot of ways to reconnect, and it can be part of the healing process. This is what Paulo Freire talks about, what he says in a very academic language, the dialogic between oppressor and oppressed. We both get transformed as we start connecting with each other and working on these things. That's the view off the front deck at my house back home. I feel like Shrek. That's my swamp. When my folks were getting started, they didn't have much money, but they had acquired this property, and it did not look like this. It looked like this. That's my dad on the tractor with my brother here. And they started planting trees. And planted all of the trees in that picture right there. It completely transformed the landscape and the ecosystem. Just a couple of people, granted, they had a child labor force. But what a transformation. A lot of times we look around at all of the problems in this world, and we start thinking, man, climate change, race relations, politics, I don't know what to do. I'll just be a decent human, tell my kids to be decent humans. I hope it's enough, and it's never enough. But all that's necessary, for evil to triumph is good people to do nothing or too little. But it's not like we need to take this mountain of problems that humans have made for thousands of years and move that whole mountain right now. It's more like we need to keep planting the seeds, and it can transform everything. And that's the work. Every time we have a conversation in mixed company and find a way to make it productive, every time we are engaged in education, every time we even pick up a new book or check out, a good YouTube video or whatever, we have opportunities to plant the seeds in ourselves and in other people. And it will transform everything. All right. So I'm going to switch gears here. One final piece. This is a picture of our family at our maple sugar harvest. It's so cool. In spite of my grandmother being brought to residential boarding schools, genocide, all these different things, both sides of the family, all kinds of stuff, we'll come out here. We have a custom when a baby's born where we take the placentas and we bury them in the maple forest by the maple trees, tree of life. So we go out there, we'll sometimes have 5 generations in the family, making offerings at the trees of life, pulling life from those trees where the placentas are buried. And it's a really cool sense of connection across generations, to place, to culture, to custom. And nobody made that happen. We had to make it happen for ourselves. Uncle Sam's not going to come walking out of the woods to fix everything all by himself, although I think we can expect bigger and better things from our government. I like the Margaret Mead quote, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." And who would those thoughtful, committed citizens be? I'm looking at them. I believe in this work. I believe in you all to do it. Thank you for your kind time and attention. Miigwech. And you can just cut me off, Greg, when we get there, but I'm happy to field a few questions. Yeah, you can pull the lights up, and I might just shout the questions back to make sure that everybody can hear them. Who wants to get me started? All right, go ahead. Yeah, so the question is, can I think of other examples from other countries where there's been a positive address of, a troubled racial history? Well, yeah, but it is humans, and so I can't give you an A+ report card, but I can say that there have been some heroic efforts that have done some remarkable healing. There are about 20 countries that have done truth and reconciliation efforts. I think one of the things, like at least in the Western world, that doesn't work as well with that is we're kind of in our heads a lot, like let's get the action items, let's check the things off the to-do list, now we are done. But sometimes healing or sustaining a relationship may require maintenance, not just a one and done effort. Also, even Canada's recent Truth and Reconciliation effort has done some remarkable positive things, but there were all kinds of issues. They took testimony from lots of people who went through residential boarding schools, but neglected to have proper supports as people are stirring up all of these old traumas, and some people really struggled. I have friends who really struggled after their testimony because it was just bringing all these things up. And sometimes people felt let down about that. Canada, by the way, is not necessarily better than America in its treatment of indigenous peoples, but they have some different circumstances there. And they've certainly, coming out of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and a formal finding of genocide on behalf of the Canadian government, they've been appropriating funds for restorative justice practices, indigenous language revitalization, things like that. And there's a new National Museum of Canadian Human Rights, which I thought was really especially beautifully well done. And there have been many other efforts. And I think there's an acknowledgement that these are still first steps and that we have a lot more work to do. But I think those provide positive examples. And one of the things that when I'm speaking to people from marginalized communities, a lot of us are like, this stuff should have been worked on hundreds of years ago, too little, too late, and people are angry and they're hurting. And at the same time, one of the messages there is, I get that, I feel that, I'm with you in that, but we still, without giving people a pat on the back or a pass for everything, we still have to applaud, encourage, and support those tentative first steps from people for whom that takes tremendous courage to take even the most timid first steps, so that we don't chase everybody away from the table and complain about eating alone. For my white brothers and sisters, I have an often different message, which is be brave, lean in. Our difficulty often stems from an unreasonable expectation to be racially comfortable all the time. When we bring a child into the world, we don't expect parenting to be comfortable. We know there will be fevers and puke and up all night and ornery teenagers, and because that's the expectation, being a parent can be one of the most beautiful and rewarding things that a person does. Because we fall in love with our kids. And then we're motivated to figure out the fevers and the puke and the up all nights, right? What if we didn't just profess, but actually did love our neighbors as ourselves? What if we really loved justice? Not just in a performative way. I love justice, but we really loved it. We'd be willing to endure some discomfort. to see our neighbors get what they need and to see justice done. Right? So the message there is be brave, lean in, we can do this together. I can't promise you it'll be comfortable. I can't promise no one will ever bite your head off for what you perceive to be an unreasonable attack. But we need you. And it's worth it. And bravery is not rewarded 100% of the time, 100% of the ways you want. But in the long run, that's what will heal our families so that our grandkids don't have to deal with this. Good question. Any others? Yes. Yeah. So what keeps me going when I'm dealing with adversity and tough circumstances, when I feel like giving up or throwing in the towel or whatever? Am I catching that right? Yeah. So that's a great question. I'm just a dude. I'm stumbling, bumbling, rumbling, getting it wrong, messing up, having tough days like everybody else. But one of the things that does help, I try to pay attention, have self-awareness of all of the different things that I need and that feed me. Psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, physically, and all of that. It's hard in this day and age. I think even our very youngest people are just bombarded with pressure. And we're enculturated to perfectionism. And we're so hard on ourselves and everyone else. So I try. I don't always succeed. I give myself a dang break and paying attention to the things I need to charge my battery. So for me, sometimes take care of my body. Gotta go for a run. I'm an outgoing introvert, so I get my battery charged away from people, but then once I'm charged up, I actually like humans. So I need to, when I'm running low, I'm out, checking out, see you later, going for a walk, going for a run, whatever. Sometimes that'll help. I have to ping pong between, I think some of the work gets done in mixed company. Tonight, we're working, all of us, in mixed company, just being engaged in this together. And then some things have to happen in an affinity space. So sometimes I'm like, summer, man, I'm on break. I'm going to ceremonies, going to the powwow, catch you in the fall, literally to folks at work. I'll just have a boundary. I will check some emails, but I'm not going to just whack-a-mole all summer long. And above all, I think I try to remind myself about the things that really matter the most. For me, I want my kids to have a chance at a long, healthy, happy life. I think anybody who has kids, that would be their wish. We might have different ideas about what you need for a long, healthy, happy life, but I think there'd be a shared wish. And so then when I think about what are they going to need, that often motivates me to come back and show up again. But yes, I deal with exhaustion, not just physical, but mentally and emotionally exhausted, dealing with BS. You know what I mean? This stuff should have been sorted out generations ago, come on, But that helps me summon enough patience to do it again. Not that I have a perfect track record by any means. Great questions. Yes? I'll come here next. Oh, yeah. No, that is a northern flicker. So it's a bird in the woodpecker family. You're welcome to check it out when we're done. So they're thousands of little beads on there. Yeah. So I had a dream about this bird, and then I commissioned a beadwork artist to do that for me. I have a whole collection of these beaded medallions of different kinds. So for the most part, this is native bling. Yep. But I do have like a fox for my native name. I've got an eagle one for my clan. I've got this one because I had a dream about it. I've got some that are floral or things like, so they range from like, more meaningful to simply decorative. Yeah. Oh, awesome. I hope they got paid right. Yeah. 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 Cool. Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm. Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I don't know if you could hear, but he was saying, thank you for sharing the pictures of your family's property and the generations, on your family's property. He said, we've done that in my family, I think 5 generations on the family property, that connection to place and across generations resonates. Yeah, thank you. Uh-huh. Oh, yeah, great question. Best poised to them. But I would tell you this. First of all, yes, I continue to work on all of them. My oldest daughter seems to have like a little higher level aptitude and passion on it, at least on the language front. And it's her profession now, so she's using it every day, keeps her sharp. But they all come with us, like to ceremonies and things like that. They all want to live close by, so we're like building a family compound, basically. There are like multiple houses in the area there. And we get together, like hunting season. There's, we're full with all of the kids and their partners and spouses. And we're in the grandbaby business now, too. So, yeah. That's a special thing there. Other questions, comments? Am I missing one? Oh, right here. Was it difficult to stay connected to my culture after college? I would say it was more difficult during college. Yeah, because I was, whatever, a 24-hour drive from home and, way out of my normal element. But I do have to say that there were some things that were really positive about having that experience, being brought out of my bubble, being a native person back home and being the native person at college and back and forth. And it forced me to find ways to communicate with things, but also to connect with other people and cultures in different ways. My freshman year assigned roommate was a Sri Lankan citizen. When we were besties, we roomed together 4 years in a row, best man at each other's weddings, still see each other every year, I think that stuff is great. That's really great. And I, like just in my experience for a couple days here at Transylvania, I think that a lot of you are living on campus and it forces some connections and you have smaller classes compared to a lot of places, so you actually have to talk to your professors and, things like that. That's actually very positive because it puts you into spaces where you have genuine connection, not just one-way information going to you that you put on a piece of paper. And so I think all of that's very positive, and I was really impressed with the students and all the questions they had with the classes that I was visiting. Super smart, super engaged. Awesome. Yeah, so yes, I did have that, but I saw positives in it. And in some ways, I think if I was like trapped at home, my whole life, I may not have appreciated it as well. Leaving it kind of helped me appreciate it, come back and go stronger and deeper too. Other people have other experiences, so, and even for Native people, half of the enrolled tribal citizenry lives off reservation. A lot of our people have been adopted and fostered out of our communities even, and so some people have had a different experience than me, kind of being an insider in our cultural space. A lot of them are like looking for their first genuine connections to and awakenings in that space and are trying to find a way back, but feel like a foreigner in that space. And so there are different challenges for different people, depending on their experience. Okay. By all means. So we're going to close it out. If you need to run, you can run. If you want to stick around, welcome to stick around. I do have cards here if you want those to keep in touch. You were awesome. Thank you so much. All right.